Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Conversations on Conversations, where each episode we explore a topic to help us have more powerful conversations with ourselves and others. I am your host, Sarah Noll Wilson, and you can probably hear the smile in my voice. I am so excited. I am over the moon excited for our guest today for episode 101. We are interviewing the one and only Dr. Amy Edmondson. So also joining me today is my colleague, Brandon Springle. We've never done a co-interview before, but we thought, why not with this one? Because he's so passionate about psychological safety. And I thought it could just make it for an even deeper conversation. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Edmondson, for those of you who are unfamiliar. Dr. Amy Edmondson, the Novartis Professor of Leadership and Management at Harvard Business School, is a management scholar best known for her research on psychological safety and team learning. She has been recognized by the biannual Thinkers 50 global ranking of management thinkers since 2011 and was ranked, no surprise, number one in 2021 and 2023. She is the author of 8, and might I add, incredible books and more than 100 academic articles. She was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2024. Her most recent book, Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well, won the Financial Times and Schroders Best Business Book of 2023. Edmondson received her PhD in Organizational Behavior, AM in Psychology, and AB in Engineering and Design from Harvard University. Please help me welcome to the show, Dr. Amy Edmondson. Amy, what else do you want our audience to know about you?
I'm a fallible human being.
Yeah, I love that.
Right. And it's not that I like being a fallible human being, but I'm trying to come to terms with it because that's reality. We all are. None of us are exempt. And so that's one of the things that drives me is that, you know, how do I help myself? How do I help others live comfortably with that? But that doesn't take us off the hook, right? I mean, that isn't sort of, oh yeah, well then no need to work hard. No, it's almost the opposite, right? We then have to be thoughtful and vigilant and willing to take risks, but preferably smart ones.
Yeah. That was one of the things when Brandon and we were having preparatory conversations about your book was it felt very much your other work have been great and monumental. This one in particular, I think for both of us felt like this is what she's been like pushing towards all of this time is how do we get uncomfortable with mistakes? How do we get uncomfortable with uncertainty? And so, if you may take us back just a little bit. So we have people in the audience who know your work, who love you, who respect you. And then we have people who this might be the first time they're introduced to you. So give us what's the abridged version of your journey to being so passionate about helping humans be human?
Okay, being fallible. Right. Well, that's a great, So I'll try to do this succinctly and maybe playing around with time here. So at the moment, I am and have been for 28 years a professor at Harvard Business School. And my stated field is organizational behavior. And I have a particular interest in team dynamics, conversational dynamics, and how we can lead to improve both. Right. And so actually I'm quite passionate about conversations. It's one of the things that I've studied for years. And in my classroom, I try to work very hard to give students the tools they need to have higher quality conversations, more honest, learning oriented, and able to make progress in uncertain territory. So that's sort of who I am today, what I study, what I care about. And I got here in a very circuitous way. I started life as an engineer. I worked as an engineer for a few years. I sort of found my way, again, indirectly into organizational consulting, got absolutely fascinated with the problem of organizations and why they're so complicated and problematic, but important to our lives.
Yeah.
And pretty quickly, meaning after about 4 years, reached a point where I thought, I just don't have enough knowledge. I don't have enough education. I don't have enough training to do what I really want to do well. So at that point, 10 years out of undergrad, I went to do a PhD, kind of thinking I'll just do this. I'll get smarter. I'll get better. I'll go back out there and I'll be more effective. I hadn't quite realized that one of the risks if you do a PhD is that you never leave. Right? You finish, but you don't leave, right? Then you move on and become a professor. And I mean, the good news about that is I get to do research and I get to teach. And I guess the bad news is my impact on the world is more indirect than direct.
Wait, Brandon, can we push her on this? Because it may, yes, technically it's indirect because it's, not always through you, but boy, has it had a significant impact on so many people. And Brandon and I, we were talking ahead of time. We're like, we know that she's used to getting her flowers, but we need to make sure she gets her flowers on the impact that she's had on not just us personally as humans, but the work, the seeing people, see themselves differently, see what's possible at work. Brandon, I want to give you a chance to jump in as well. So if you don't mind, Amy, we just want to give you a little bit of love for a second.
I guess I can handle it. I guess I can.
Yeah. So we take this journey all the way back to like 1954. And we go towards the theory of creativity, right? And the work of Dr. Edgar Schein and the book there in 1965 and so forth and so on. But from 1954 to 1999, a lot was taking place. And as you position, your work, your experience being extremely vulnerable and how that failure work leads to, this now explosion of psychological safety. And so many people exploring the concept, you popularized the concept and you made it broad and you started to stretch that out. And then more and more research started to come down the path. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and acknowledge how it started with you willing to be vulnerable and saying, I didn't even know if I was going to continue to make it through school. Like this was a huge failure. Like I didn't know what was going to happen. So seeing that starting point and how you leveraged failure to power your resilience, right? And amplify that through the power of psychological safety and then help build stronger teams all throughout the globe. So we just wanted to acknowledge, to magnify, and to make sure we were amplifying that specific and direct example.
Well, thank you. And I'll underline, because if, readers, listeners will not necessarily have read my new book, Right Kind of Wrong, but I do open it with a story of, which I won't try to tell the whole thing now, but I will just say, I open with just a glimpse of a PhD student, me, sitting at my desk with a massive failure on my hands in terms of the data not supporting the hypothesis and feeling utterly lost and a little bit hopeless because, what do I do now? I'm obviously not very good at this because it's a big failure. And jump ahead, that failure opened the door to kind of at least the discovery of profound differences in psychological safety across teams in a couple of tertiary care hospitals. And that discovery that teams could vary so much in whether people felt able and willing to speak up about mistakes or when they need help was not something I was looking for, but having stumbled into it, then I recognized that it might have legs, right? That could be something that was more generalizable than just this one situation. And it might be something that was measurable. And if measurable, then it might in fact be a good predictor of team performance. So it started a whole different line of research than the one I was engaged in the first place. And I think it's a metaphor too, because in life, sometimes the biggest disappointments, the failures that you really didn't expect or want are in fact, I know it's a cliche, but they are opening a new door. And sometimes that new door is a whole lot more interesting, or the path out of that door is a lot more interesting than one that you'd set your sights on in the first place. And so learning to, not only be okay with the disappointments of failures, especially in new territory failures, but also to recognize that that's in fact how life, that life is paved with failures along the way to achievement, friendships even, and some sense of joy as well, right? That's just part of the curriculum.
That's something that I love so much about your most recent book, The Right Kind of Wrong, is helping people be able to reframe these moments that can feel so painful. Right. And it makes me think this was a number of years ago, speaking to a group of women in business at a college, and they were asking me about my journey, and it was explaining to them, like, here's all the thought I was doing this, and they're like, one young woman said, I want what you have. I just don't want it to take 14 years to get there. And I was like,
14?
But that's what it took. Like, that was the journey, for us to go there,
There's no shortcut, really.
I know.
I mean, you can get lucky and some amazing serendipitous things can happen, and you can have, you can have sudden opportunities but that are just in a way a good luck. But more generally, right, despite those occasional exceptions that prove the rule, there isn't a shortcut to either achievement or, joy or meaningful relationships. They're all, and I don't think saying they're all hard work means it's not fun. I mean, that hard work can be a lot of fun. Yeah. There's that sense of it feels good when you work really hard at something and you get somewhere. Yeah. Yeah. So let's make that connection between failure and psychological safety. Sure. And, we know that we talk about that work a lot, but we find that a lot of people either misunderstand it, misdefine it. They hear it as, oh, well, psychological safety means people need to feel comfortable, when the truth is that couldn't be further from the truth. So I would love to just sort of kick us off on, how do you define it? How do you want people to think about it now? Yes. Right? Yes. Knowing how often it gets misconstrued or sometimes weaponized even. Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, as I travel even around the world, I'm hearing that more and more, that people are saying, help, people are weaponizing psychological safety, which is the height of irony, really. But I get it. Right. I understand. Right? I understand why it happens. And in part, it's it's linguistic, right? It's psychological safety. It sounds comfortable, rather than, so it's almost that confusion between, fear and courage. I think people sometimes think, courage means you're not afraid. It's not, right? Courage means you're afraid, but you do it anyway. I mean, if you're not afraid, there's no courage needed, right? But we get confused. So psychological safety is a sense of, around here, my environment, there's permission for candor. There's permission to ask for help when I don't know what to do. I believe that it is expected, welcome, won't lead to punishment or rejection. So it is not that it's easy or comfortable. It's that you believe it's how we roll, right? So it's, around here, maybe it's because of what's at stake. Maybe it's just because we're really all pretty comfortable with we know each other well, and we understand that we're going to tell the truth, and we're going to tell it in a timely way. So my formal definition is it's a belief that the context is safe for interpersonal risk. Yeah. But that is not the same as that it's easy or fun or comfortable. Yeah. And so how it's being weaponized now is that people are, people working in organizations, if they get feedback that maybe is constructive feedback, they say, okay, you took away my psychological safety. Yeah. You can't criticize me because you removed my psychological safety. And that's ironic because in fact, if I'm willing, it's a kindness. Now, if I'm your manager, it's my job, but still, it's still a kindness, right? Because I could just write you off and not tell you. and not develop you and not promote you and all the rest. But if I give you the gift of constructive feedback, that is not taking away your psychological safety. That's demonstrating our psychological safety. I mean, it's demonstrating the premise that we have agreed to be open and honest and timely with each other.
Brandon, what comes up for you?
I mean, that's just a beautiful example. I think about, constructive feedback is construct to build upon versus destructive, feedback, which tears down.
Yeah.
And, when we think about, psychological safety, Amy, I like the way that you described it in another episode on a different platform I heard, where you talked about it more as, if I could kind of look at it again, it'd be just around the learning environment, or the learning culture.
Yes.
And so when we think about, allowing people that space to speak up, and that sometimes that seems to be, attacked, or people want to take that away. What do you think the greatest modern threat is to the great work of psychological safety?
Well, I think the greatest threat is people misunderstanding it and then the weaponizing that follows. And then it becomes toxic, right? Then it becomes sort of off the table. And then we lose out on the opportunities it brings, right? So there's a pretty robust research literature now that says, teams or groups with more psychological safety have better results, right? In a variety of contexts. So you're right. I have said it that way. I said, gosh, part of this misunderstanding is my fault, right? That the term itself has this implication. Comfortable, I'm going to be happy and comfortable psychologically, free or whatever. But what it really is, I mean, what the definition really describes is a learning environment.
Yeah.
A learning environment, if it had been called learning environment, people would have thought that was a little squishy, I think, or vague or something like, oh, you mean a classroom? Well, no, really. I mean, anyway, and it is this interpersonal environment. So I think the risk is that we lose access to the benefits of creating these learning zones if we have decided, oh, that's some touchy-feely thing, or that's some situation where we can never be honest with each other because it might hurt someone's feelings.
Yeah. It's a pendulum, right? Of the weaponizing of it, because on the one end, what we're talking about is people saying, "Oh, I'm uncomfortable. I'm not psychologically safe." And then on the opposite end, people can use it to be harmful, right? To be aggressive, to be assertive. And it is this delicate sort of balance. Or I'm curious to get your thoughts on that, of like, what's that? How do you navigate the nuances of it? Because I know for me, I know when I feel it. And I know when I don't feel it.
Yep. Right. Me too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it actually comes back to, that's why I'm emphasizing this so much now in my classroom, comes back to the goal, or a goal of high quality conversation. Because fine. High quality. That sounds easy. Right? No. That is really hard. Yeah. Because here's how I define a high quality conversation. It's one in which I'm not holding back what I'm really thinking, because I don't think you'll approve of me if I say it. So people are both, they're willing to lean in and be truthful and speak up in a timely way. So we're the real issues are being surfaced. Number two, there is a healthy balance of what Chris Ardress called advocacy and inquiry, right? We're making statements, we're asking questions. When we're asking questions, we're actually genuinely listening to the replies, right? So that, in a sense, it's not really inquiry if we're not listening. We're not learning anything. So we are learning. A high quality conversation necessarily involves learning. And third, there is a palpable sense of making progress, right? We're not, we don't feel like we're going around in circles. I feel at the end of that conversation that I came out knowing more than I knew going in, and perhaps contributed something to others' learning as well. Now, those three criteria, we're speaking up candidly, we're balancing advocacy and inquiry, and we're making progress. I think if you grade most conversations on, let's say, a 1 to 5 scale for all three dimensions, there are very few conversations that are going to hit it out of the park, right?
Yeah.
And not because we're bad people or uncaring people, but because these are really skillful acts, right? So to speak up candidly, to give even just something as simple as giving constructive feedback is not easy.
Yeah.
Because you need to figure out a way to say it. Like, you can't just say, I mean, obviously, you're just not good enough. Well, that's just utterly unhelpful. But you can say, you have to take the time and the work of figuring out concretely, what did I notice that led me to think you're not good enough, right? So I have to be concrete. I have to notice actual behaviors and actual perceived consequences of those behaviors. And then I have to be willing to share those, as best I can. And then you will have learned something, I will have learned something, and, we're having a high quality conversation. So this is a highly skilled activity, and it's a highly skilled activity that is easier to master in a psychologically safe environment.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something that one of the ways we talk about is none of us are born knowing how to be in relationship with each other. None of us are born, and depending on how you grew up, so I'm from Iowa, right? Midwest nice. I always say we're violently polite, right? So there's a lot of conditioning as a white woman, right? Of how to show up. And when I think about, I remember the first time that I read your definition of team as teaming, like, no, it's a verb, it's an active thing. And for me, that's the same way I feel about relationships. It's not a thing. It is a choice.
It's a verb.
Yeah, it's a verb. It's to be in relationship with each other, and recognizing that, again, it's not easy. One of the things that Brandon and I were talking about, and our colleagues, and we've observed a lot, is the reality of, and I'll speak this from my own experience. I'm so passionate about helping people free the elephants in the room. And how do we stop feeding them? How do we have those conversations? And that work started because I had never experienced a team that had that kind of, I didn't know the word psychological safety at that point, right? In my studies.
The elephant in the room is perfect.
The elephant in the room, like, didn't know it. And then I also realized that not only had I never experienced that on a team, I had never experienced that in my personal relationships either. Yeah. So I started on this quest, right? Of how do I learn this? And I think that is something that we see in our work, that you can talk about it, you can show what it can look like, but when people have never experienced it, it's an even bigger stretch to get them to step into those moments, because everything in their life to that point is like, red flag, the stove is hot, you don't speak up, you don't, right? Like, they've learned and been conditioned to not do that. And I'm just curious to get your thoughts on that idea of, how do we shift if we've never experienced it to start stepping in and doing the work? It's a big question.
It is. I mean, it's baby steps. We don't talk about the elephant in the room, but we talk about that kind of little lizard in the room or something, like and then you realize, well, that was kind of a relief. Like, now we're talking about the lizard. And so if we can talk about the lizard, we can then maybe move on to, I don't know what's
the
next.
Squirrel, the groundhog,
something, some medium-sized thing, and then again, every time we have the experience of taking a small interpersonal risk and you don't die, that is like profound. Like that is just a little. Oh, okay. It's actually okay, right? I tried it and it wasn't as awful as my brain was telling me it might be. And in fact, it was kind of a relief. And so I'm going to do that again. And if you layer on to that the possibility that, we actually make progress, come up with a better idea for our project, or, do something we wouldn't, manage to get something done we wouldn't have gotten done, then that's even more rewarding. So I think it's, one risk at a time and a gradient where we start taking more risks. And the risks are really the building of skills, like interpersonal skills are hard cognitively, intellectually, but they're also hard emotionally. And that's why it's such tricky territory.
I really appreciate, Brandon, I want to hear your thought because I know you're thinking about a lot right now. I just want to name this real quick is that idea of giving ourselves and giving other people permission or grace or compassion, because sometimes when you're in a situation where maybe somebody's very comfortable with it, they're like, I don't know, why can't you just say it, and not recognizing that my muscle's not built up. It's, it's like working out with somebody. I was working out with my trainer recently and she wanted me to do this plank that I hadn't done in 4 months. I was like, I can't do that. Let's start real small. And it's the same kind of thing. Brandon, I'll turn it over to you.
We'll work up to the plank.
Yeah, we'll work up to the plank. Yeah.
We must always work up to planks. So when I think about, what's being stated, I start to think about the landscape of social threats versus social rewards. And that's part of what makes it so difficult and why psychological safety is so important. Because psychological safety, and I'm going to go to your 2x2, you have high psychological safety and the high standard. And you have to have both if you're seeking that high performance culture where you can learn and grow. But sometimes that standard is not made clear. Yes. And one of my favorite parts of your book, The Right Kind of Wrong, is this unequal license to fail, especially when you start talking about relationships, because my threat state might go up a little bit higher depending on who am I approaching and what are the consequences if this doesn't go well. Can I afford this failure? And so just want to get your reaction to that.
Yes. And that's in chapter 8, which I'm sorry to say that it's not until chapter 8, although I think there's breadcrumbs
along the way. I will say, I was like, isn't it interesting that it's an A and but there is a thread throughout.
Yeah. And there is, the story of, various people who had difficult roads because of their identity. But anyway, but I'm so glad you brought this up because it's, there are unconscious and very spontaneous cognitive processes that lead to stereotyping, right? Most people don't stereotype on purpose, but if they're honest, they have to be aware that their brain is stereotyping kind of automatically. So when a kind of, Joe Blow white guy fails in a particular assignment in a corporation, nobody would ever come to the conclusion, well, we shouldn't have hired a tall white guy for that role because look what happened. It's literally nonsense, right? Whereas if you have a person of color or a woman in a role where they are very much underrepresented and fail in that role, the brain of others is instantly going there, right? So this is why I say failure is failure can be seen, especially, the good kind of failure, as a privilege, right? We don't yet have a level playing field for failure. Some people have more license to fail and still be thought well of than others.
Yeah, and it puts me in a position to think, and that's why I think this book is so important. And to a degree, I'm glad that's on the back end because of what you're working through to get there. And you provide so many examples with so many diverse perspectives of people who have been successful navigating. Like I think of the doctor with I think it was rational behavioral therapy.
Yes, Max Maltby. I love him.
Yeah. So all the things, it helps us understand how we kind of navigate almost that emotional intelligence and that rational behavioral therapy and that healthy thinking to start to reframe. And then your work can help us teach other leaders how to shift their brains and not go into that space of unconscious bias. So I did want to just acknowledge that.
No, that's true. I love that. And because Maxie, whom I had the privilege to know back in the late 80s, he really influenced me, and his work. He's founding father of rational behavior therapy, which is close cousin to cognitive behavior therapy, by his mentor Albert Ellis. But the recognition that we can, talk about conversations. Some of the conversations are the ones that are going on inside our heads, and a great number of them are unhealthy and unhelpful. And his idea was, we really can learn to notice them and tame them, right? And make them more, his word, rational, which I would describe, and he would too, as more in line with factual reality. You're going to be late for an appointment, and your brain is just saying, "Oh my God, I'm going to die," right? It's like, no, you're not, right? It's not catastrophic. It's inconvenient. Like, let's get it right. And that cools down the emotional tenor of your thinking, and gets it closer to where you can be more effective. And so, but I think you're right, Brendan. The fact that I write about the unequal license to fail in the end is after seeing stories, not only stories of people like Maxie Maltzby, who was an African-American physician born in 1931 in the South, but also you're just seeing story after story, right? Of failures that either, that led to success, and other failures that we wish had been avoided altogether, like certain airline crashes. But you're getting the gist of the framework, right? That there are failures we should work hard to prevent in familiar territory, and then there are others that we must embrace because they're part of progress and part of accomplishment in any field. But you're seeing all those stories, you're getting a sense of how it works. And it's like, okay, like, here's my toolkit. But then there is this need to point out that the toolkit is not equally accessible to all.
That is such a gap in so much literature and research, right? Any book on difficult conversations, on giving, receiving feedback, even my book, right, on not feeding the elephants. I mean, that was one of the points of feedback I got. They're like, a lot of this works really well for people like you, and I was like, damn, you're right, and I have to examine that and also help people understand that there's no one way, right, and we just have to understand. And I do love that imagery of, there is a toolbox, but the toolbox is going to look different for different people. And there's going to be
a key to the toolbox.
Right. And you might be able to use the hammer successfully, but if I use it, and it's bringing that awareness. And again, I just go back to grace and compassion, because that's part of what can make it easy to step into the uncertainty and the pain together. One of the things that Brandon and we were having conversations about ahead of time. We had a lot of glorious conversations. It's been quite fun. But one of the things you talk about in the book of how critical it is to become comfortable with failure. And one of the ways we do it is essentially this is our language, is to right size it, right? But to look at what's the type of failure. And so I would love for you to piece that out for the audience. And then my follow-up question can be, in the spirit of the focus of the show and our work of relationships, how do those types of failures also apply to how we engage in relationship?
Absolutely. Spot on. Well, first of all, I just realized in leaving the conversation about unequal license to fail behind, it's a little depressing. And so I want to say there isn't a kind of a magic wand. But I do believe that sunshine is the best medicine here, right? That in fact, the only approach I can think of is by calling attention to it. It makes it less so, right? So that, with all of us working together, we call attention to the unequal license, and then it's like, oh yeah, oops, right? And then we can make it more equal because it's no longer hidden, it's out there. Now, I love the phrase, we'll right size it, because I think that is right. I think that's related to what Maxie Maltzby was talking about. We tend to awfulize, but then we can kind of bring it back down to inconvenient, or not my first choice, but still okay. But so what I thought, one of the things I tried to do in this book is if we can really train ourselves to make the distinction between the different types of failure, and I think these are scientifically valid, then we will be better able to welcome the good ones, right, kind of wrong, what I call intelligent failures, and paradoxically also better able to prevent the preventable ones that we just as soon, not have. And so the three kinds of failures I identify are basic failures, complex failures, and intelligent failures. Basic failures have a single cause. They're simple. They have a single cause, usually human error, and just you're making a batch of cookies and, you forget the sugar. They're not going to be very good. And it was, if you'd been paying more attention or checking off the ingredients as you use them, you would have easily been able to prevent that failure. And I'm a fan of that, right? There's no point in wasting all those other ingredients and ending up without yummy cookies at the end.
I'm having a very strong reaction to your example. And my husband's listening to this because he's reminded of the cheesecake I made without sugar.
Oh, well,
and then, and it was just... So don't ask me to make cheesecake.
We have many such stories. And maybe I should add, because of your strong reaction, that in fact, just because a failure is basic and preventable doesn't make it shameful. Because I'll go back to the beginning. I'm a fallible human being, right? As each and every one of us is a fallible human being. That's, by the way, a Maxime Maltby term. Nobody's exempt from being fallible. So we will make mistakes, but you want to try not to make really catastrophic ones, right? You don't want to text and drive. Now, 90% of the time you'll get away with it, but then there's that time where, you get into an accident or worse. So, I think we can all aspire to be, to do our best with our recipes and do our best with our practices and, not have more than our share of basic failures, right? But also not to beat ourselves up for the ones we do have. And I bet that cheesecake wasn't so bad.
My dad poured a lot of table sugar on it and I was real confused, and then it was fine.
Pour some nice strawberry syrup on it or something.
It's
maple syrup. Oh, I love maple syrup.
It's a great story now. Okay.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And then, complex failures are perfect storms. They have multiple causes where any one of the factors, any one of the contributing factors on its own would not have produced a failure. Probably the best way to think about that is, kind of a handful of small deviations from best come together to produce a failure. Those days where nothing goes well, and then ultimately you mess up something pretty important to you because of that. And it's those two, with real vigilance, with appropriate training, with care, we can prevent or at least mitigate most of those. And so I'm not a fan of preventable failures. I think that's clear by now. So then the third kind is what I call intelligent failures. And they are best understood as the undesired result of a thoughtful foray into new territory. And the criteria are that, it's new territory. You can't just pull a recipe off the internet. Like, we don't really know how to get the result we want. It's in pursuit of a goal. Like, it's worth trying something uncertain, brave, what have you. And third, you've done your homework. You've got good reason to believe this might work. Whether you've read the literature or talked to friends, whatever it is, you've thought about it. So it's a genuine hypothesis. Right? And then number 4, the experiment or the failure, if you get one, is no bigger than necessary. No bigger than it has to be to get you the new knowledge you need in new territory. And so if you think about failure that way, you realize these are just essential aspects of progress, especially in new territory. And that could be new to the world, like leading edge scientists. It also could be new for you if you pick up, pottery, and take a class, and you're not going to be good at it right off the bat. Or the the plank, right? You're willing to try something that you won't do well at right off the bat because it's in pursuit of a goal.
That right there is such a beautiful, I don't know that I've ever heard it described so succinctly, because even that word experiment can scare people sometimes, right? You know, like if our colleague Dr. Teresa Peterson would be here, she'd say her engineering husband would be like, "Oh, I don't experiment. I just, I fix it."
Yeah. Right.
Like,
okay. Well,
right?
The very fact that, it's like any marriage was, except an arranged marriage, was preceded by dating, right?
Yeah.
And all dating is subject to intelligent failures, right?
Yeah.
Someone says, "I have a friend I'd like you to meet," and they have good reason to believe, and you believe, yeah, this is a trustworthy friend. And yeah, you do want to meet someone, perhaps to share your life with. So, you go out on the date and lo and behold, it doesn't work out. That's okay, right? It's an intelligent failure. And, if you only did things that you were absolutely guaranteed to work out otherwise you wouldn't do them, you would definitely never find a life partner.
Yeah. That's such a great, I just never thought about like the act of dating being a full experiment, but it is. I mean, and everything we do that's different and new and novel and trying it.
And no guarantee.
Right. Yeah. What comes up for you, Brandon?
Well, I love the example because when I think about the book, there's this example of blind dates. And then at some point there's a marriage situation that may or may not be your parents. Right. So
yeah, I love that.
But, when you think about those relationships and just having that conversation. And I love the framing that you had earlier of the high quality conversation and the way you can even assess that. So I have to go back and watch that part so I can take notes.
Me too. Yeah.
But then you think about the failure typology and how you overlay that right on the high quality conversation. So you might get 2 out of 3. It might even be 1 out of 3. It might be 0 out of 3.
Yeah.
But understanding what a high quality conversation looks like, you can go back to the drawing board and build that resilience through failure. So I just wanted to kind of make that connection.
I love that.
That's what was resonating with me.
No, that's right. Because I mentioned the idea, it's a hypothetical idea of self-rating, right? You can self-rate on those dimensions. And yet we should take it seriously and actually do the rating and then say, okay, well, if it fell short, like what will I try next time? Yeah. What will I do differently next time? How will I help myself be more willing to share what I'm really thinking? Or how will I force myself to ask more questions rather than just advocate my view?
Yeah. I'm excited to go back and think about that more as well and see what else you've written on it, because one of the things we're really passionate about is how do we better understand when conversations miss the mark?
Yeah.
Right. And for people, and because relationships feels like something you should just know what to do, but you don't, one of the things that we're always looking for is like, how do we make that more explicit or specific?
Yes.
Just like the examples you shared of here's what a high quality conversation. And so in what we're playing with and, figuring out what research to validate it is like, what are the different needs in the moment?
Yeah.
And how do we better see that? And how do we get better at noticing? You know what I mean? Like, so the model we're working on, and I'd be curious to kind of get your thoughts on it, is this idea of the 6 conversational needs. There are moments when you need to inform. There are moments when you need to advocate. There are moments when you need to create. There are moments when you need to clarify, right? And then the 2 that we find people struggle with the most is there's moments when you need to validate and there's moments when you need to repair. And when you look at that like sense of failure, a lot of times people don't want to validate or repair or even create or clarify because they're so afraid it's going to go wrong. And so like, I'm so excited to chew on this idea of the high quality conversations. So I'm just curious to know what comes up for you.
I'll send you 3 things. So one, I haven't written about the high quality. I have, but I haven't. But I have one slide which will have the 3 dimensions and some definitions, and I'll send you that. But then I have written. There are 3 articles that come to mind, and one is with Diana Smith, whom I think I introduced you to. Yeah, called "Too Hot to Handle."
Yeah.
And this is where we talk about how conflict can get hot. And in a sense, this is like right sizing. It's in a sense, it's about, you can't just, ignore it or just not you have to cool it down. You have to confront it head on and cool it down. And the way you cool it down is through, inquiry and exploring and finding out what's really going on really underneath it. But in that article, which we published in California Management Review, we do give a kind of framework, which is managing self, managing conversations, and then managing relationships. And each of them kind of start with being more self-aware, being more honest with ourselves about our own impact and so on. And I think that does really have a kind of set of practical, not easy, but practical suggestions that or practices really that we can learn to master. And then two others. One very recent one with Megan Wrights from the UK, where we talk about how those little that comment that lands poorly at a meeting and you just want to fall under the table.
Yeah.
And it's we talk about those as intelligent failures that, in fact, we should do a better job of learning from, and we don't generally. And then with Thijs Bijou from Belgium, we wrote a piece a few years ago on sort of, there's speaking up, there's holding back, but there's also, that's not the only dimension, right? So
I would love that.
Too.
I would welcome that. I mean, these are things that we continue to explore because again, we all struggle with communication and it's something we have to learn and it's something we all know is important, but you're like, but what does it look like? And even, even in your work, and that's something I really appreciate about this book and something Brandon and I have talked about is just, those specific frameworks of, okay, here's how you can categorize it differently. Here's how you can think about it differently. Because so often I feel like people are like, well, you just got to get comfortable with failure. Like, well, how the hell do I do that? It feels really
I need to
bad.
break it down, right? Break it down into something a little bit more actionable that I can practice tomorrow.
Yeah. And like micro, that's one of our big things is micro actions, macro impact. Like we just got to start really, really small. Brandon, as we're winding up our time and before I get to ask her the question we ask every guest, I want to be very thoughtful of her time. What final thoughts do you have or final question you have, my friend?
Just the biggest thought that I'm having right now is that when we're engaging in conversations, it's best to have the psychological safety to be able to say, I'm working on this.
Yeah.
And I would like for you to give me feedback because I want to get better at this because I want to have a deeper connection. I want to be able to partner with you. And so just want to kind of understand how that's hitting you, how that's resonating with you and your thoughts, because sometimes I think we might have an opportunity, we might be working on it, but we're not telling anybody. And so they're just like, you're acting different. I don't know why. And I'm not going to ask you. I just want to get this conversation done. So
that is so important to me. And one of the things that I often say is make it discussable, right? Because once you make it discussable, then it's out in the open. Then as you say, some of these things would feel a little awkward for people to try. So it's much better if you can say, here's some things I want to try and I'm going to welcome your feedback. Like I'm going to be leaning into inquiry. And I hope you won't think I'm trying to interrogate you, right? No, I'm literally trying to learn from you, but it might look different because it's not the way I've been showing up in the past, right? So like, when you're trying something unfamiliar, say so, because then you can learn. You'll accelerate the learning that way. So I think that could not be more important, and it then has the potential to give rise to sort of a virtuous feedback loop, right? I'm going to take that little risk of leaning into some domain of learning. Then I'm explicitly asking you for feedback. So I'm going to get some more feedback and that worked out pretty well. So now I'm going to try something else, right? It becomes more natural and more comfortable the more we do it.
Yeah. And how we receive it and how we show up with it. I mean, that's something that I feel like we're a coach of mine would say, I'm nauseatingly consistent about the fact that when you ask for feedback, it isn't just about the information you're getting in that moment. It's how you show up to make it safe for something else down the road for them to share. And also when we can speak it, because sometimes it happens when you start showing up differently, people can be skeptical and then they can be distrusting about it. You know, I can't tell you how many times, typically it's a man, I'm just going to say it. They'll be like, Sarah, I listened to my wife differently. And she was like, what's wrong with you? And what are you, why, like, what did you do? But I mean,
is it a gimmick? Is it a trick?
Yeah. And normalizing that. And there's so many layers of benefit to it. You're building safety, you're role modeling what it looks like to have intellectual humility, right? You're inviting them on the journey. So I really appreciate, Brandon, you bringing that up in the conversation. Dr. Amy Edmondson, we could and would love to talk to you all day long, but we know that you're a very busy woman and we're so grateful for this opportunity. And maybe there will be another conversation down the road. I hope so. But every new guest of the show, we ask them this question, which you'll love because it's in the spirit of the work you do. But what is a conversation that you've had with yourself or with someone else that was transformative?
The one that came to mind, which is a long time ago, was a conversation I had with Chris Schroders, and a mentor of mine in graduate school, where he was giving me the written feedback on the proposal, my dissertation proposal. And he essentially said it was competent. He thought it was looked to him the work of a good student of Richard Hackman, who's another committee member and advisor. And it's not like
it's not
wild-eyed praise, but at least it's, I didn't flunk out or anything. So I'm hearing that. I'm okay with that. And then he said something that really did changed everything. He said, I don't see Amy in it. I said, what? Like what? I mean, it's something. What I heard from that, I assume it's what he meant, was you are allowed to express yourself. Like you are invited here to bring your voice forward. Do not be duplicative or, you don't have to turn yourself into a clone, what you think a good researcher of teams looks like. I'm hoping, he was saying, that you can actually bring your voice and your insight forward and possibly do something a little better than this, right? and I was really quite floored. I mean, it was profound, right? It just hit me. I had to leave pretty quickly the office because I was going to cry, and I did cry because it was so freeing. It was like he'd opened the door to find your own voice, do your own work.
How about you answered the follow-up question, which what has been possible for you?
I mean everything.
Everything we're sitting with
because I just didn't. I think I just stopped holding back. I started saying, okay, if I think this is interesting to me, it's probably interesting to at least couple other people. So I'll write about it that way. I won't try to. Also, I stopped trying. I mean, I think I did less of making my writing sound so academic, and I decided to just write clean prose.
Which we appreciate. And the neurodivergent brain in me really appreciates. This has been such a gift to be in conversation with you and to have the opportunity to deepen our understanding and be in just to explore these topics. We're just so grateful for you, and please continue to bring Amy forward in your work because it's literally changed the world. And we can't wait to see what you create next. So thank you for saying yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been just a pleasure and a privilege.
That's been our episode of Conversations on Conversations. Normally, I would share something that resonated for me, but since we have a co-facilitator, co-interviewer, we thought we'd just take a couple moments to reflect on what were some of the things that stood out for us. So, Brandon, what were some of the things that stood out for you in that conversation with Dr. Edmondson?
Yes, certainly the the framework of that high quality conversation, that was the part, because now you have almost a way to measure like how effective you are. You can now, strive to get better at different dimensions of that conversation. So I thought that was so powerful. It was powerful to me, and it'd be powerful to anybody who listens and takes that note.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that, we were talking about that I want to make sure we highlight is this is somebody who is literally identified as one of the top thinkers in the world, in her field. And you had made the observation, and she's still learning. So for people who are listening to this, what you wouldn't have known is she was still taking notes. She was still jotting down stuff. She was still having moments of, oh, that's really I really liked how you said that even as somebody who is seen as really one of the foremost experts is still learning. And man, that's a great reminder for all of us.
Yeah. And we covered such a wide spectrum of topics, and it was all integrated. Like when you think about failure, when you think about the need for psychological safety, and really how psychological safety is an accelerator. Yeah. It needs more around it. In isolation, okay, but you got to have standards with the safety, and then you get the space for learning, and the space to fail well, because failing well is dependent upon how the leaders around you are viewing you, or even your peer group, whoever it might be. And everybody has a role to play to create that psychological safety in alignment with the right standard that you want for the environment or the culture that you find yourself in.
Yeah, it was.
Or that you actually influence.
Right. Or that you have like a lot of authority over. That's Brandon, right. As my first ever fellow co-interviewer, thank you. Thanks for saying yes, and thanks for showing up. And folks listening, you won't be surprised, but Brandon and I had countless conversations prepping for this. So we're going to try to capture some of those concepts on social and articles. But I get to take this as a moment. I'm so grateful you connected with me on LinkedIn. And now we get to do this kind of work together. So thank you, my friend.
It is mutual. It's mutual.
I love it. Well, friends, that completes another episode of Conversations on Conversations. And for those of you who are listening, yes, my face hurts from smiling so much. Not only did I get to be in conversation with somebody who I have admired for years, but I got to do so with my colleague, Brandon Springle, who I just absolutely adore. And it was just such a special experience. And as always, we want to hear from you. And actually, I'm going to put a little skin in the game for reaching out. So her latest book, The Right Kind of Wrong, is such a great book. It is a dense book. I mean, she goes into the different practices, and there is something for everyone in that book. So if you are hearing this and you would like a copy of it, the first 10 people to send me an email at podcast@sarahnollwilson.com, we'll get a copy of the book sent to them. So just send me your name, your address, and we will get that copy sent out to you. So even if you're listening to this in a couple of months, don't assume that 10 people reached out to us. You can still send us an email, and the worst we'll do is probably just send you a copy. So again, podcast@sarahnollwilson.com, and also would love to hear what resonated for you. If you are a longtime or first-time listener of the show and would like to support the show, please make sure that you rate, review, and subscribe to the show on your preferred podcast platform. This helps us to be able to get exposure, continue doing the great work that happens with the show, and be able to continue to have amazing guests like Dr. Amy Edmondson. And if you want to support the team that makes this show possible, please consider becoming a patron. You can go to patreon.com/conversationsonconversations, where your commitment of even $10 a month goes to support the team that makes this show possible. Not only do you get the episodes early, you get them ad-free, and you get some pretty great swag for free from the show that you can only get by becoming a patron. So please consider doing that. A final thank you to the team that makes this show possible, to our producer, Nick Wilson, to our sound editor, Drew Noll, our transcriptionist, Becky Reiner, and our marketing consultant, Jessica Burge, along with the rest of the Snowco crew. I want to give another shout out to Brandon Springle. This was his first time interviewing somebody on a podcast, and he was brilliant and amazing. And I was so grateful that he said yes to doing this with me. And then finally, a wholehearted thank you to Dr. Amy Edmondson for the work that she's done, the way she has pushed our thinking about what's possible in the workplace, and for saying yes to the show. All right, my friends, that's it. That wraps up another episode of Conversations on Conversations. Thank you all so much for coming back, listening, giving us your time and attention. And remember, when we can change the conversations we have with ourselves and others, we can change the world. So till next time, please be sure to rest, rehydrate, and I will see you again soon. Bye.